Part 18. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 171. Chapter 171 Hurt each other. I can do it too, she smiled and looked at Lu Zizhu with bright eyes. Lu Zizhu tossed another coin for her. Come again. Zhang Wanan nodded solemnly, as if he was completing some great mission. But when the hammer came down, what she muttered was, kill Xiao Zhuzi, kill Xiao Zhuzi. Lu Zizhu originally looked at her with a smile and thought it was cute that she was talking non-stop while typing, but when he heard what she said clearly, his smile gradually solidified. His face darkened. He also put coins in another platform. He picked up the hammer and hit it harder than Zhang Wanan. He also imitated Zhang Wanan and said, beaten and to death, beaten and to death. What can be done? Why don't we just hurt each other? The hammer fell one after another, and the battle between the two became more and more intense. It didn't look like they were playing whack-a-mole, but like the two were really fighting. From time to time, people passed by them, and when they saw the old and the young playing and chattering, they couldn't help but look back, and they even couldn't help but click their tongues as to what made them look like this. Zhang Wanan was the first to get tired from playing. She rubbed her sore arms and sat aside to watch Lu Zizhu finish the round. Have you vented your anger? Lu Zizhu walked over and asked her. What about you? Zhang Wanan asked him instead without answering. Lu Zizhu saw her rubbing her arm and warmly took her arm to him and gently rubbed it for her, saying, I'm so angry. Now I see the little gopher and think it's all you. Everything looks like you to me, Zhang Wanan said without admitting defeat. Then do you think that person looks like me? Go ahead and beat him up. Lu Zizhu pointed at a person over there and said provocatively with a smile. Provoke her. Provoke her again. Today he seemed to be a different person, a despicable person, even more despicable than when he bullied Su Xiao. She could finally understand the feeling of Su Xiao. Zhang Wanan ignored him and ran to the other side to play on the basketball machine with a few game coins. As a result, as soon as I put in the coin when I got there, I heard Lu Zizhu's voice from behind, how many shots can you make if you are so short? After that, a ball went into the basket. Laughed at her again. This time, he was so disrespectful. Zhang Wanan was going to be mad at him, so she endured it with all her strength, picking up a ball with trembling hands and shooting, but she didn't score, and the second one didn't go in either, just like she failed time and time again when catching the doll. I was in a bad mood to begin with, but then I heard the people behind me laughing. Originally she wanted to endure it, but after enduring it again and again, she couldn't hold it back anymore. She turned around and threw herself into Lu Zizhu's arms and hit him hard. Don't laugh. But Lu Zizhu didn't know what happened today. He kept laughing even after being beaten, as if he wasn't the one who was being beaten. Okay, I'm not going to laugh anymore. Lu Zizhu almost laughed and hugged Zhang Wanan, pressing her into his arms and not letting her move. Zhang Wanan seemed to be tired from the beating, so she didn't move in his arms and just panted tiredly. Why bother? Lu Zizhu took out a tissue and wiped the sweat on her forehead from beating him. Who told you to laugh at me? Zhang Wanan said as he bared his teeth and claws and pounced on me again. Lu Zizhu hurriedly pressed her little hand and begged for mercy. I don't dare anymore, I don't dare anymore, I'll teach you how to become stronger. I don't want it, Zhang Wanan refused and lay lazily in his arms, not wanting to move anymore. She was almost exhausted. Then take a rest, Lu Zizhu said softly. Zhang Wanan was really tired from playing. After lying in his arms for just a while, she became a little dazed. She shook her head and braced herself, sat down and looked around, and suddenly her eyes were attracted by other things. She suddenly woke up. End of this chapter. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 172. Chapter 172 The vinegar jar was overturned. Loses who watched Zhang Wanan suddenly pull away and ran to the other side, and he stood up and followed. The little girl didn't know what she saw. She ran very fast and disappeared in the blink of an eye. When Loses who found her, he found her standing blankly in front of the dance machine. Loses who followed her burning gaze and his face turned dark instantly, just like his reaction when she had just touched the baby. Loses who walked over, grabbed her hand and asked angrily, "What are you doing here?" "There is a little brother dancing," Zhang Wanan said in a low voice. "What does it matter to you if others dance?" Loses who said and started to pull her away. Zhang Wanan tried to break free, but failed several times. She found a place and held on hard. "If you don't want to go, look." Loses whose face became darker and darker. "If you don't want to look, leave." "Why?" Zhang Wanan asked, still looking at the two dancing brothers intently. "It doesn't look good, don't look at it," Loses who said coldly. "It doesn't look good, why are there so many people watching it?" Zhang Wanan pointed to the people standing around. Loses who looked around and found that there were indeed many people watching. "No matter how many people there are, they don't care about your business." After Loses who finished speaking, he didn't care about her reaction, just picked her up and left. And Zhang Wanan only had time to exclaim. Loses whose move instantly became more exciting than the dance of the two people, and everyone looked at them. "It's so overbearing, it's so difficult for me to abuse others at such a young age," a young lady covered her mouth and exclaimed. "Maybe that's my brother," came the faint voice of the man next to the young lady. "Brother is good, he is also domineering, no matter he is the elder brother or his childhood sweetheart, that little girl is happy, how different is it from you?" the young lady couldn't help shouting at him. She was really upset. She had never received such treatment. "Okay." But who would have thought that the next second the young lady also screamed in surprise, and she was also carried up. In an instant, everyone was attracted to them again. They suddenly felt that it was not easy to stay here for a long time. What should they do if they were not to be tortured by everyone big and small? In an instant, people dispersed one after another, and the people who were still standing there watching suddenly became only a few scattered people. The two dancing brothers looked at each other and felt that it was really miserable. It took a long time for them to be so popular, and it turned out to be like this. The other side. Loses who didn't care whether the little girl shouted or not and carried her into the elevator. The little my shoulder kept moving. "Littles who's it is a bad guy. Stop making trouble, or I'll throw you away," Loses who threatened her. "You're not even willing to give up," Zhang Wanan said with a firm voice. Loses who laughed angrily at her words. This little girl seemed to have figured him out and held him tightly. She was still moving on her shoulders. Loses who frowned and patted her buttocks with his other hand, saying, "Stop moving. If you move again, it will really fall. You are too heavy. You're so important, why don't you hug me?" The little girl blushed, but she didn't move anymore. Zhang Wanan didn't move again. Loses who smiled with satisfaction. He was particularly eye-catching while carrying the little girl. Many people on the road would look at them and couldn't move their eyes away. Most of them looked enviously, envying Zhang Wanan. Zhang Wanan blushed when she saw so many people looking at her and covered her face with her hands. "You are so annoying," Zhang Wanan said in a muffled voice. Loses who curled his lips and smiled, took a car on the side of the road and put Zhang Wanan in. "Stop covering it." Loses who got into the car and took her hand away. Zhang Wanan glanced at him and stopped looking at him, turning to look out the window. "Is your face still red?" Loses who asked her funny. "Bad guy, you won't be allowed to watch other people dance," Zhang Wanan said angrily. Loses who smiled and took her hand, leaned over and whispered, "Xiao's who's knocked over the vinegar jar." After hearing this, Zhang Wanan's face turned redder than before. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 173. Chapter 173 Husband and Wife. It's just watching other people dance, Jongwon muttered softly. But I would have thought that you thought those two people were better than me and more attractive than me, Luzes said, looking ahead. Jongwon suddenly laughed, his smile trembling wildly. Luzes glanced at her coldly. What are you laughing at? No, I want to say that in my eyes you are the best. Jongwon stopped smiling and looked at Luzes seriously. Luzes instantly became very happy because of the little girl's words, but he didn't show it on his face. You two siblings have such a good relationship, the driver in front said with a smile. Our children are about the same age as you, and they often fight. We are not brothers and sisters, Luzes said seriously. Huh, the driver couldn't help but look back and said, no, it looks similar. We are childhood sweethearts. It was Jongwon who spoke this time, and her clear voice made the driver's heart tremble. Childhood sweethearts, the driver muttered silently, as if he felt a little weird. Yes, childhood sweethearts, Luzes repeated. Then they look like a couple. The driver looked at them again and said with a smile. He really found that the two children looked very similar, and at first seeing how well they got along, he thought they were biological siblings, but he didn't expect that their relationship was better than that of biological siblings. Actually, it's quite enviable. The driver sent the two people to their destination. The more they looked at the two people, the more they looked good. The more they looked at them, the more they liked it. After looking around in the car, they didn't see anything good. Finally, he gave them a slap with a big wave of his hand. Fold. It's up to you two to be such a good uncle and give you half the price. You'll be fine in the future, the driver said with a smile. Luzes insisted on giving him everything, but after being in a stalemate for a while, he was defeated by the driver's enthusiasm. Thank you, uncle. Jongwon held the baby in her arms and bowed her head to express her solemn thanks. The driver waved his hand, opened the accelerator and walked away. Is it because we are too good looking? Jongwon asked with a smile, raising his head. Luzes knocked her on the head and said, the driver must have thought it was not easy for me to pull a fool. Luzes Jongwon was furious and yelled his name through gritted teeth. Luzes was stunned for a moment. I'm wrong, I'm a fool. Jongwon snorted, I sincerely admit my mistake. I forgive you. Luzes smiled. Just as he was about to speak, his phone watch rang. He raised his hand and hung up immediately. Why didn't you answer? Jongwon asked doubtfully. I'm not going to pick up the annoying guy, Luzes said. Just when Jongwon was about to ask who the annoying person was, her phone and watch rang. She raised her hand and glanced at it, then pressed the answer button with a smile on her face. Hello, brother Jinchu. Oops. Little Anan. I'm going to die, Gu Jinchu shouted exaggeratedly on the other end of the phone, and Luzes could hear it clearly even if the hands-free was not on. With a dark face, Luzes reached over and wanted to hang up. He was on the phone anyway, and there was no good in it. But before he could reach out, Jongwon stopped him. She put her hand on her mouth to signal him not to speak. Brother Jinchu seems to be in danger, he said. He is dying and we have to save him, she frowned and said seriously. Oh, how naive. He just wants to beg for food, Luzes said coldly. His voice was neither loud nor quiet, but it could be heard by the person on the other end of the phone. Yes, just begging for food. Can you take me with you? Gu Jinchu shouted at the top of his lungs. How about not taking it? Luzes shouted at him at the top of his lungs. You will regret it, Gu Jinchu said and then hung up. It turns out that brother Jinchu is really annoying, Jongwon said in disbelief. Let's go and eat. Luzes took Jongwon's hand and walked along the map in his mind. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 174. Chapter 174. He is my future boyfriend. The restaurant was still the one recommended by Gu Jinchu. If he didn't really know where to go, he would never ask Gu Jinchu, so that he would have to be a light bulb if he kept pestering him. Luzes who led Zhang Wanan into the restaurant called Xing Chenju, and the waiter led the two of them to find a seat. Luzes who took the menu handed over by the waiter and looked at it for a while and asked, "What do you want to eat? Take a look for yourself. Don't watch it yourself, you know what I like to eat, just order it." Zhang Wanan looked at Luzes who seriously with her little face raised. Luzes who smiled and blurted out a few dish names as soon as he put the menu together: sweet and sour pork ribs, fish-flavored shredded pork, Buddha jumps over the wall, Kung Pao chicken. "Xiao Jojo, are you going to make me a fat man?" Zhang Wanan couldn't help but interrupt him as he ordered a table full of meat dishes. Although she loved all of them, she couldn't order all meat dishes. It's easy to get tired of eating, the key is to spend money. "I just want to give you more food." Luzes who also realized his problem and scratched his head in embarrassment. "Okay, that's enough." Zhang Wanan said this to the waitress standing aside. The little sister nodded and said, "Little sister, you are so lucky. Your brother loves you so much," she said to Zhang Wanan enviously. Zhang Wanan's eyes turned into slits as he listened to her words, but what she said next made the waiter couldn't help but widen his eyes and become even more envious. "We are childhood sweethearts. He is not my brother, but my future boyfriend." Zhang Wanan explained their true relationship to a stranger for the second time today. The young lady looked at Zhang Wanan and then at Luzes who in surprise. She felt that this was what everyone said was a talented and beautiful woman. She was already a winner in life at such a young age, and what about her? "I have lived for more than 20 years and have never held the hand of a strange man." The young lady couldn't help but shed tears in her heart. Children are so cruel these days, how can she go out on the streets in the future? The waitress felt that she had no shame in standing there talking to them anymore, so she took the menu and left in dejection. "Let's have something to drink first, the food will be served soon." Luzes who poured a glass of juice and pushed it in front of Zhang Wanan. He seemed to be very satisfied with Zhang Wanan telling others that they were childhood sweethearts. Zhang Wanan kept smiling as she took the glass of juice, but the smile didn't seem to be directed at him. Luzes who turned around and followed her gaze in confusion. His face instantly became cold, and he didn't face Zhang Wan at all. Such tenderness as Ungshi. "Why are you here?" Luzes who asked coldly. "Aren't you here to have a meal?" "We have made an appointment." Gu Jinchu casually walked over with his pockets in his pocket and sat down next to Zhang Wanan very naturally. "Hello Anan, do you miss my brother?" Gu Jinchu greeted Zhang Wanan after sitting down and even boldly reached out to pinch her cheek. "Gu Jinchu, you've gone too far," Luzes who sat there and warned him in a cold voice. He was so shameless that he just ran over and actually touched Zhang Wanan. Has he really lived enough? "Oh, sorry, I forgot you were still here. I'm so sorry." Gu Jinchu raised his eyebrows and said to Luzes who, "I'm spending money today, and you actually said you forgot I'm here. Is there something wrong with you, Gu Jinchu? Is it a sense of superiority to be a light bulb?" Luzes who couldn't help but swear. When Gu Jinchu saw that he was about to get angry, he was immediately defeated. "Brother, don't be angry. I really have no choice. I don't have much money left, and my parents won't be able to come back for a while. I can only come here to take advantage of it. It's time to eat." He started to show his pity. "Don't be angry, Xiao Jojo," Zhang Wanan said to Luzes who with a wink. Luzes who's expression softened a little, but his voice was still cold. "I won't do this next time." End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 175. Chapter 175. Special Hobbies. When Gu Jinchu heard that this was a meal, he nodded repeatedly, and excitedly stretched out his hand to give Zhang Wanan a high five. "Come here and sit over here," Luzes who roared. Gu Jinchu smiled awkwardly and sat over. The dishes came one after another. When the last dish was served, Gu Jinchu grabbed the waiter and said, "Bring 2 more sets of cutlery, sister." Huh, the young lady glanced at the table and was a little confused, but she quickly realized it, smiled, nodded and went to get new tableware. "What are you doing? Isn't a set of tableware enough for you to eat, or is it because you have a big mouth?" This time it was Luza's turn to be confused. "Can't you be a little more friendly to me?" Gu Jinchu asked helplessly, holding his forehead and looking at him. "Isn't it friendly enough to keep you here for dinner and ask you to be a bright light bulb? Why don't you leave?" Luza's disliked him very much. "Heh, the next light bulb will come when I leave," Gu Jinchu said as he naturally took Luza's chopsticks and took a bite of food. Luza's took one look at his chopsticks and felt disgusted. When the waiter brought new tableware, he took it and put it on the other side of him to guard it closely, for fear that the pervert would take away his chopsticks again. Gu Jinchu looked at him with disdain, and then glanced out the window unconsciously. Luza's and Zhang Wanan also looked out. "No, another light bulb is here," Gu Jinchu pointed to the window and said. With the sound of a wind chime shaking on the door, the waiter soon led a person to their table. "Hello, are you surprised or surprised?" Avril stood in front of the table and greeted them with a smile on her face. "Luza's Zhang Wanan." But after a while, the table where there were 2 seats was filled with people. Luza's looked at Avril opposite, and then at Gu Jinchu on the side, feeling helpless for a while. "I heard from Jinchu that there is delicious food here, so I came here," Avril said with a wink. Luza's finally couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up suddenly, took Gu Jinchu by the collar and left. The 2 little girls were so surprised that their mouths opened wide, but the most confused one was Gu Jinchu, who was pulled away. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" He grabbed his front collar hard for fear of being strangled. "I have to go to the bathroom to talk to you." Luza's dragged him hard and didn't care about his yelling or the puzzled looks from around him. Gu Jinchu, who was being dragged by Luza's suddenly laughed and laughed loudly. "Luza's do you have any special quirks? Just say that you are scared alone and that's it. Why are you all brothers being shy?" Luza's didn't say anything, and just dragged him away with a sullen face. After entering the bathroom, Luza's forcefully threw him against the wall. "Hold the grass. What are you doing? You don't really have any special quirks, do you?" Gu Jinchu looked at his fierce look and unnaturally covered his shirt. "What are you doing?" "Beat you up," Luza's said, grabbing his collar again, and the 2 of them started fighting. After the beating, Gu Jinchu touched the corner of his mouth and spat, "You're so cruel." Although he didn't do anything cruel, he still felt as if he had lost half his life. After beating him, Luza's was obviously much relieved. He turned on the faucet and washed his hands gracefully, air-dried them, patted them and said lightly, "Who asked you to make a light bulb?" "Just, you beat me up just because I'm a bit of a loser? Then I'm too unjust, right? Next time, don't rub against me. If you rub against me again, I'll beat you up," Luza's said and raised his fist. "Died unjustly." When Luza's walked out of the bathroom, Zhang Wanan and Avril were eating. They were talking about something unknown while they were eating. Then he saw Zhang Wanan rolling forward and backward with laughter. Seeing Zhang Wanan smiling, Luza's suddenly felt better. He called her with a smile and walked over. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 176. Chapter 176, Eyebrows. Zhang Wanan and Avril were the only ones who came back. Avril looked at him in confusion and asked, "Where is Gu Jinchu? Perhaps you haven't eaten enough in the toilet yet," Let's eat first. Loses who sat down calmly and naturally picked up a piece of ribs for Jongwanan. In the toilet, didn't you have enough to eat? Avril repeated, and her eyebrows knitted together in a complicated way, as if she couldn't eat any more. After a while, Gu Jinchu came out covering the corners of his mouth. Avril looked up and saw this scene. Mom? It's not what she thought, is it? Why did you come out, covering your mouth? Avril's eyes widened and she couldn't help but think, and the picture in her mind became stronger and stronger. What are you looking at me for? Gu Jinchu walked over, picked up the chopsticks and took a bite of the food. He winked at her and asked, do you think I'm too charming? Avril looked at his chopsticks and then the food with complicated eyes. After a while, she organized her words and asked, didn't you eat in the toilet? Huh? What are you eating in the toilet? It's funny, I'm hungry, Gu Jinchu replied without reacting for the first time. That's good, Avril whispered. Huh? No, what do you mean? You mean I was in the toilet, eating? Gu Jinchu looked at her in disbelief and asked, what kind of imagination is this? How dare you say it? No, I don't have it. I don't have it. Avril waved her hands and quickly denied it, but the glance in her eyes had betrayed Luz's Hu. Gu Jinchu looked at Luz's Hu and asked with his eyes, are you spreading rumors to cause trouble? Luz's Hu nodded. Well, I won't pursue it since I've eaten your food. Gu Jinchu continued to raise his eyebrows. I think you're afraid of being beaten again. Luz's Hu raised his eyebrows in response. Are you flirting with each other? Avril felt that today was so strange. Gu Jinchu rubbed his eyes and sat down. Who would be willing to flirt with him? It's disgusting. I am willing. A weak voice sounded. At first glance, Gu Jin shook his head and said helplessly, you are the only one who is stupid. Fool. As soon as he finished speaking, Jongwanan put on a flattering expression, held her chin and said to Avril, I can flirt with you, at least you are a woman. Get out of here, Avril feels sick just thinking about this shit-eating man. Gu Jinchu smiled awkwardly and lowered his head to eat seriously. However, the way he ate was a bit ungraceful and he looked like he had been hungry for a long time. It seemed that his parents were not at home and he really lived a carefree life without eating. They had almost eaten, only Gu Jinchu was still devouring it. Avril glanced at Gu Jinchu, who was lowering his head to eat, and felt that this person was more active in eating, and maybe playing basketball. Is your manuscript ready? The selection will be on Monday, Avril asked suddenly. Luz's who was stunned for a moment and glanced at Jongwanan who was eating snacks and nodded slightly. Avril immediately knew what was going on when she saw his expression. She quickly shut up and made a shut up gesture. Have you eaten yet? Luz's who asked, patting Jongwanan's head. Jongwanan raised his head and wiped his lips with a bright smile. Eat? Then, shall we go first? Luz's who pointed outside. Good. The two of them had already stood up while talking. Gu Jinchu was still lowering his head to pick up the food. When he saw that the person who was inviting him to leave, he hurriedly reached out with one hand and grabbed the corner of his clothes and asked inarticulately, have you paid? Do you think I'm someone who doesn't pay? Luz's who said coldly and left. Sister Avril, brother Jinchu, see you next time, Jongwanan said sweetly before leaving. Okay, the two of them waved their hands to her in unison. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 177. Chapter 177. Is it time to separate? What are you seeing? They're gone. What's the use of 2 light bulbs? I'll buy you 2 light bulbs on the way back, Luz's who said angrily. Yes, I was despised again. Why aren't you leaving? Gu Jinchu raised his head and glanced at Avril, who was sitting opposite. Avril glanced at the dishes on Gu Jinchu's plate and smiled. How lonely are you eating alone? I'll stay with you. It's better for you, those two are so heartless, Gu Jinchu said with some emotion. You can't blame her. It was the two of us who disturbed her. She wanted to go on a date, but who knew that we suddenly came over and killed her? If I didn't really have money to eat, I wouldn't be like this. Gu Jinchu scratched his head and felt a little embarrassed by Avril's words. Come here, let's not do such immoral things next time. We were beaten quite badly by Zhu just now, right? You, see it, Gu Jinchu said and couldn't help but touch the corners of his mouth. The bruises on the corners of my mouth are so obvious. I'm not stupid. Eat quickly. Gu Jinchu nodded and said no more. He lowered his head and carefully picked up the food. The other side. Zhang Wanangzhen walked out with Lu Zizhu, stroking her round belly with satisfaction. Lu Zizhu knew from the look on her face that the little girl enjoyed her meal, but he was a little unhappy because of the two light bulbs that appeared out of nowhere. Xiao Jojo, should I separate from you? Zhang Wanan glanced at the time on her wrist. You can go back with me if you don't want to. But if I don't go back, my mother will be so lonely at night. Zhang Wanan lowered her head and looked at her toes with worry. Nope. Why not? Zhang Wanan asked him uninterestedly. Because, your mother also lives at my house, so do you want to go? Zhang Wanan raised her head in shock when she heard what he said, and looked at him with bright eyes. Really? Didn't you lie to me? How did you know that my mother would also live at your house? How could I lie to you? Because your other mother just called me and told us to go home for dinner after lunch, because we are getting together again. Just after he had a fight with Gu Jinchu in the bathroom, Lin 11 called and said that Tang Yu was at their house now and that she had left her behind and asked him to take An back. Yeah, I can live with everyone again. Zhang Wanan jumped up excitedly. Lu Zizhu was also very excited because tonight was going to be another lively night and everyone was gathering again, except for him who had never been there before. Lu Zizhu took Zhang Wanan to a nearby supermarket to buy some snacks to satisfy his craving. When they were almost done, Zhang Wanan looked at the snacks in the cart and stopped Lu Zizhu from holding anything, and said seriously, okay, Xiao Jojo, we should save some money. Lu Zizhu was amused by her serious look. Is it up to you to pay the bill? Let's go. Zhang Wanan sat in the shopping cart and waved her hand forward to signal Lu Zizhu to rush. The two of them sat in the car carrying two large bags of snacks. When they arrived at Lu Zizhu's house, Zhang Wanan turned to look out the window and suddenly sighed, I haven't walked this road for a long time, Xiao Jojo. Yeah, you guys moved away a long time ago. Lu Zizhu also turned to look out the window. The two of them turned their heads to the left and right while talking. Xiao Jojo, this is where we rode our bikes before, Zhang Wanan said, looking at the place that was passing by outside. Do you still want to ride a bicycle? Their car was still sitting in the garage. It had been idle for a long time and must have been covered with dust. Is that okay? Zhang Wanan looked at him expectantly. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 178. Chapter 178, He will accompany you through mountains of swords and seas of fire. Lu Zizhu nodded and said, yes, I can accompany you in whatever you want to do. As long as she wanted to, he would accompany her up the mountain of swords and into the sea of fire. Then let's go back, put down our things, and then go ride there again, okay? Good. The two of them said that the car had stopped at the door of their house. After paying the money, they carried their things into the yard. It's still the same familiar place, so comfortable. Zhang Wanan held the things in her arms and turned them around. She was really happy to be back here. After all, the familiarity was still there after living there for so many years. Lu Zizhu stretched out his long arms and took her back to him. Stop turning around, you, if you have some conscience, just come back and visit more often in the future. You have no conscience, Zhang Wanan pushed him and said suddenly, it's not that I don't want to come back. The main thing is that I look so cute and beautiful. What if a trafficker notices me and abducts me? Loses who looked up at the sky and smiled, it would be terrible if any human trafficker targets you. Don't you want to eat them up? Can you speak well? It's so annoying, Jongwanan said, pushing him hard and running into the house along the familiar road. As Loses who walked towards the door with his long legs, he could hear the lively sounds coming from the door which was not closed tightly. As expected, the little girl was able to bring the atmosphere, and the whole family was so excited when he came back. Loses who smiled helplessly and shook his head. Now that the little girl is back, he must have become a picked-up child. Anan, let's go, Loses who called her loudly as soon as he entered the room and put down his things. What's the matter with you, brat? How come you were kidnapped by us right after you came back? Lulin threw a freshly peeled orange peel at Loses who. Loses who nimbly dodged his attack. Anan is going out to play and will be back soon, he explained. Lulin looked at Jongwanan eagerly. Jongwanan saw Lulin's little eyes and suddenly felt reluctant to go out to play. She ran to Loses who without saying anything and whispered a few words to him. Loses who waited for him to finish speaking, straightened up, shrugged helplessly and said, I'll listen to you. Little's who's it is so nice, Jongwanan said excitedly, ran to Lulin, jumped into his arms and said, Anan won't go out anymore, Anan will play with daddy. Sure enough, daughters are all father's little cotton-padded jackets. It seems that this is correct. Lulin smiled so hard that he couldn't see his eyes. He put a peeled orange into Jongwanan's mouth. Looking at such a harmonious scene, Loses who felt more and more that his birth was an accident. He turned around lonely and walked upstairs to prepare for tomorrow's speech. Hey? Xiaozhou, why did you run upstairs just after you came back? Sit here and play for a while. Tang Yu noticed him and called him. Auntie, I have something to do. You guys go ahead and play. I'll be down in a moment. Loses who turned around and said to Tang Yu politely. Tang Yu didn't have the nerve to keep him when he heard that he had something to do, so he smiled and nodded. Loses who ran upstairs, closed the door, and laid out the smooth speech he had written on the table. The setting sun shone in and was a bit dazzling. He squinted to see the setting sun outside and closed the curtains without hesitation. No matter how beautiful the scenery is, it cannot disturb his progress in memorizing the manuscript. After all, he will finish the manuscript tomorrow, because only in this way can he get more points than those who are holding the manuscript. The more points he got, the more opportunities he would have to give a speech at a nearby school. However, it was not his original idea to show off in public. He just wanted to go to one of the primary schools, the one with Jongwanan. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 179. Chapter 179. The years are quiet and peaceful. He was halfway through memorizing the manuscript when there was a sudden knock on the door. When Loses who looked back, a small head was already exposed from the crack of the door. Loses who smiled when he saw her. He waved to her to come in. After getting permission, Jongwanan opened the door and jumped in, rushing towards Loses who. I'm here to accompany you, Xiaozhou. Jongwanan boldly reached out and grabbed Loses who's face. Loses whose cheeks were stretched by him, and his mouth became bigger. He gently patted the little girl's hand. The little girl looked at him and smiled, took her hand off and made a face to show him. Loses who reached out and pinched her cheek gently and said, "Naughty devil." Jongwanan hugged one of his arms and leaned on his shoulder and asked, "What is Little's who's doing?" Loses who pointed his chin at the things on the table to show her, but when Jongwanan saw it, he covered his eyes in shock and shouted exaggeratedly, "There are too many words, I don't want to read them, I have a headache." Loses who smiled helplessly. He had already guessed her reaction. "You don't like to study?" Loses who put her on the ground and asked her to stand up, and said, Let's go play over there. Jongwanan nodded, but she didn't go there but ran toward the door. Luzes who looked at her doubtfully and couldn't help but ask, "Where are you going?" "Go get the doll you caught for me today." Jongwanan opened the door and said. Luzes who made an okay gesture. "Are you afraid that I won't come back if I run away?" Jongwanan joked to Luzes who with a playful smile before leaving. Luzes who smiled and said nothing, but he felt that the little girl's unintentional words touched his heart. He was not very afraid, but only if he could find him, but if he couldn't find her, then he must search everywhere to find her. He won't let his little girl get away. Jongwanan was sitting on Luzes who's bed playing house with those dolls in his arms, while Luzes who was sitting there quietly memorizing the manuscript. He suddenly felt that this was very good, and he had a feeling of peace and tranquility in the ears. Luzes who had almost memorized the manuscript. He took one last look, closed the manuscript and put it there. He stood up, stretched and walked towards Jongwanan. "What are you playing with?" he asked, glancing at the pile of dolls on the bed. Jongwanan did not answer him, but pointed at him and said to the dolls, "Look, babies, Daddy is back." "Dad," Luzes who repeated softly with a smile. He suddenly felt that if he really had so many dolls, he would definitely become a winner in life. However, Jongwanan also had to become the mother of the dolls, otherwise he would be a winner in life. "What does it mean?" "Yes, these are children. We are playing house. You will be the father and I will be the mother." "Okay," Jongwanan said, picking up a doll and stuffing it into Luzes who's arms. Luzes who was amused by her. He reluctantly took the doll and hugged it like her, saying, "You are still a child." "So, I said this is just playing house." Luzes who compromised, smiled, and said helplessly okay several times. Luzes who played house with Jongwanan for nearly half an hour. He suddenly felt that it was quite fun. He had an inexplicable sense of immersion, as if he had really become a family. But what if those dolls were really children? That's a little weird. Before going to dinner, Jongwanan placed the dolls neatly on the bedside and muttered to herself before leaving, "Mom is going to have dinner with Dad, so be good." Luzes who couldn't help but laugh when he saw her serious look. Jongwanan saw him smiling and gave him a fierce look. Luzes who didn't dare to laugh when he saw the vicious look in her eyes when she looked at him. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 180. Chapter 180. The wedding venue is now decided. This night became very lively because of the return of Jongwanan and Tang Yu. "Sure enough, our family has never been this lively without you guys," Lin said with a wry smile. "It was pretty deserted after the two of us moved out." Tang Yu also smiled. "Why don't you move back again? The room is still reserved for you. It has not been touched, but it is cleaned every day." Lin 11 said this with expectation. Tang Yu shook his head and said, "We've already moved out. At worst, we can come back to get together more often. I can't just trouble you. The implication is that I don't want to move back again." Lin 11 nodded, "Keep your word. Come back more often. We will keep your room clean. The door is always open for you and you are welcome at any time." "Okay, enough sisters." The two of them high-fived each other in a tacit understanding, as they often did when they were in college. After the two high-fived, Lin 11 suddenly poked Lu Lin under the table, and then winked at Tang Yu. The two of them followed her eyes and discovered the problem. "Tisk, tisk, tisk, hubby, don't you think you owe me something?" Lin 11 looked at Lu Lin and said. As soon as Lin 11 said these words, everyone turned their attention to them. Even Lu Lin felt a little bit panicked. Lin 11 looked at the panicked Lu Lin and suddenly felt how he could survive in the company with such mental quality. How could he have so many people under his command? Lin 11 stepped on him under the table and winked at him cautiously. Lu Lin suddenly had an idea and understood what she wanted to express. He coughed twice and started to play. Lin 11 raised her hand, looked at it for a few times, and sighed, I have been with you for so many years and I don't even have a decent couple's bracelet. It's okay if I don't have this. But why don't I even have couple's clothes, what's the matter? Tang Yu almost couldn't help laughing when he heard what she said. Oh my wife, it's all my fault that I've treated you badly. We've been through these few years and our children still don't understand. It's all my fault that I have low emotional intelligence and am poor. I can't even afford a bracelet or clothes. Lin 11 couldn't help but roll her eyes when she heard him calling him poor. This guy still called him poor, bah. Lu Lin could tell that Lin 11 disliked him. He frowned and curled his lips as if to say, I'm really poor, all my money is with you. Don't go off topic, Lin 11 said with a wink. Are you telepathic? Luzes, who couldn't help but interrupt his weird parents. Why aren't our bracelets more upright? Luzes, who asked with a frown. He had already seen clearly who they were acting for. The key was that they specifically pulled it on the couple's bracelets. It was so obvious that they were meant for them. They listened. Quite smart. Lin 11 knew that she had failed in her performance and rubbed her nose in embarrassment without saying anything. If you want to ask anything from now on, let's be more upright and direct. If your acting skills are not that good, then stop acting. Besides, your son is not a fool. Luzes, who couldn't help but educate them. Lin 11 and Lu Lin nodded sensibly when their son said this. They really looked like students listening to the teacher's lecture. I think they are both childhood sweethearts. Wearing a couple's bracelet shouldn't be a problem, right? Luzes, who seemed comfortable when he said this without educating Lu Lin and Lin 11 at all. Is it okay? Zhang Wanan stuffed a mouthful of rice and repeated what Luzes, who said incoherently. Tang Yu couldn't help but laugh when he heard that his silly daughter was also asking, thinking that this little girl was really not reserved at all. No problem, Tang Yu was the first to reply. She quite agreed with this marriage. Lin 11 and Lu Lin heard that the girl's parents had spoken and they had nothing to say. Lin 11 immediately slapped the table and shouted, well done, mommy looks after you. What a bonus. Dad will book the hotel venue for your wedding now. Save it for later, and you won't be able to book it later, Lu Lin said and made a show of making a phone call. End of this chapter.